Hi there, welcome back to my kitchen. Today we're making baklava. It's a beautiful Mediterranean style dessert. And if you've never had it, oh my goodness. It has phyllo pastry, lots of butter, honey, and layers of ground walnuts and cinnamon and sugar baked in between the phyllo pastry. Let's get started and I'll show you how I do it. So the first thing you're going to need is a frozen package of Phyllo pastry. And these are in every grocery store in the pastry section of the freezer section. The most important thing to know when you're starting this recipe is that this should be taken out of your freezer and thawed overnight in the fridge so that it's completely thawed. If there are any little frozen bits at all, it's going to be very difficult to work with. Things will break apart. So be forewarned, you should have a completely thawed roll of phyllo pastry to work with. And we have a fairly large amount of walnuts. This is 4.5 cups of walnuts. The best bang for your buck when you're buying nuts to make a recipe like this is Costco or your local bulk store. This isn't a cheap recipe to make, but it's so delicious and well worth the splurge around the holidays. And it makes a big batch, so you can wrap up a few pieces and distribute them as gifts with your family and friends, and they will absolutely love it. The other thing you're going to need is a cup of melted butter, and later on, after the baklava bakes, we're going to pour over top a cup of honey. And this is just a nice plain wildflower honey. Try to get a good quality honey, something that you really enjoy the taste of. And but I'll set this aside. We won't be using this until after the baklava is completely baked. So you're going to want to use a food processor for this, unless you're really good at chopping a large quantity of nuts. A food processor just makes this job so much easier. They're not toasted or anything. They are going to bake in the oven and take on a nice flavor that way. So I tip these all into my food processor bowl. Did I lose one? Yes, I did. And we're just going to pulse this until the walnuts are very nicely chopped up into small pieces. You don't necessarily want them finely ground. You want there to be some discernible pieces of walnut, but you don't want them pulverized so that they turn into walnut butter. So we'll just keep pulsing until we get them to the texture and consistency that we want. So pardon my noise. That didn't take long, so we'll take that off the machine. I'll get rid of this. So I have a large mixing bowl here, and I'm just going to tip out the chopped walnuts into this bowl. And then I have 2/3 of a cup or 150 grams of white sugar. I'll put that in with the nuts. And I have a generous teaspoon, about 7 or 8 milliliters of cinnamon. And we're just going to toss the sugar and cinnamon throughout the nuts. Okay, I've gathered a few things together. We have our nuts as we made earlier. And I have my 1 cup of melted butter. I just put 1 cup of butter in a big measuring cup and I melted it in the microwave. So you can set that aside. And I have a damp tea towel. So I have this damp tea towel. And this is going to keep the phyllo sheets from drying out while you work. Get this in the direction that you are working in. And this is rolled in 2. So we're going to unfurl that. So now we have 9 by 13 glass baking dish, and I'm just going to take my pastry brush and just very liberally grease the insides of this pan. Just want to make sure you have lots of butter all over the bottom and sides of the pan. Take one sheet of your phyllo very carefully. Just be gentle with it so you don't rip it apart. And layer that into your baking dish. Just press it into the bottom, gently press it up against the sides of the pan. And because of that butter, it should stick nicely. Now, we will butter this layer very generously. Use your pastry brush to push that up against the sides of the pan and into the corners. And it's okay if these edges of phyllo come up over the sides of the pan. We're going to trim that all off later, but don't worry about that for now. So now we're going to do this 5 more times. So a sheet of phyllo. And if your pastry seems to be drying out as you're working, you can wet another tea towel, not wet it, but just make it slightly damp and lay that over the top while you're working. I think I will do that. You don't want it to be soaking wet, just slightly damp. That'll keep that from drying out while you're working. And then more butter. The butter and the phyllo layers are what is going to make this dessert shatteringly crisp and beautiful. As you bite into it, it just crunches in your mouth. Okay, so we have our base layer of phyllo and butter, and now we're going to take our nut and sugar mixture, just by cupfuls. So I have a measuring cup here. Scatter that and just use the back of your spatula to spread that out into a nice even layer. And make sure you're pushing it into the corners too. So there's our first layer of nuts, sugar, and cinnamon on top of our base layer of phyllo. So now we're going to take our pastry, and packages of frozen phyllo that you buy in the store are perfectly sized to work with a 9 by 13 inch pan. So if I put this pan here, you'll see that half of that perfectly fits the pan. So what I'm going to do now is find the center point of this, and I'm just going to take a sharp knife and cut this sheet in half. So we'll keep that covered up. So now we've cut this phyllo in half. So take your half sheets and just drape that into your baking sheet over the nuts. Then brush that very lightly with butter. And this is going to be a little delicate, so just dab the butter in places. You don't want to have your phyllo going flying everywhere. The first layer is always the most delicate. And you're going to do this 4 times. So that was 1, there's 2, and it's okay if those pastry sheets tear on you because you can just patch them up. More butter. So you get the idea? You have your base layer of phyllo, a cup of your nut mixture, 4 layers of phyllo and butter, and then another cup of nuts on top of that. And you just keep going until you've used all your nuts and all your pastry and all your butter. Another cup of nuts. Sprinkle that everywhere. Spread that around. And then 4 more layers of phyllo and butter. And repeat until everything is used up. Final piece. It's always nice if it works out that that's a pretty one that hasn't been torn. So, and you'll have, you know, maybe 2 or 3 pieces left. If you want to, you can save that and make something with it, or not. You're going to have just enough butter to put a nice final layer over the top. Don't waste any of that butter. So I cleaned up my workstation a little bit, and I'm going to turn my oven on to 300 Fahrenheit and just let that preheat. And while the oven is preheating, we're going to take a sharp knife, and as best as we can, we're going to trim off these edges. So just lay the flat of your knife against the glass edge of the pan. And those edges are fairly dry, so some of them are just gonna break off like that. And you're just trying to neaten it up a little bit. Find the edges with the handles are always the most difficult part. And one of the trademarks of baklava is its lovely diamond pattern. So we're just going to score the tops of this to make it easier to cut when the baklava is finished baking. So find a corner, and with the tip of a very sharp knife, just cut a little fairly shallow cut in the top few layers of pastry. Just be really careful with this. Use a sharp knife. And you want your baklava pieces to be about that wide, so about up to your index finger knuckle. So make another mark. Use your knuckle as a measure. Try to keep those lines parallel. Okay, now you want to turn it in the other direction and do the same thing. And if any of those top layers come loose, just push them back into position. It's going to be fine. And like I said, you're not cutting all the way through, you're just cutting the top layer of pastry. That will be your guide for cutting once the baklava is fully baked. So if any of your top layers of pastry have shifted on you while you're cutting them, just nudge them back into position. One last little step that I like is just a little bit of pumpkin pie spice. You can put cinnamon over the top, nutmeg, cardamom. This has the whole shebang. You don't need much. It's just a nice little dusting. Sprinkle it from a height between 2 fingers. That smells like Christmas. We'll slide this into the preheated oven to bake for about an hour, or until it looks very golden and crisp. Usually takes an hour, could take a little less, could take a little longer. There's my oven. All right, let's wish this little baby well. We'll come back when this is baked and I'll show you how beautiful it looks and what the final step is, drizzling it with honey before we cut into it and taste it. I'll be right back. It's smelling so wonderful in here. The baklava is just in its last few moments of baking. So one last step we have to do to finish this baklava is to pour over some hot honey. So I have pardon my messy measuring cup, but I have the same measuring cup that I used for the melted butter, and I've poured in 1 cup of honey. So I'm just going to heat this honey until it's just barely to the boiling point, and I do this in the microwave. So just give me a few seconds. I'm going to heat this honey up, and then we're going to pour it over the baklava. Okay, my honey is nice and hot. That took about 1.5 minutes in the microwave, so it just turns it into a nice loose honey rather than very thick, unpourable honey. So now it's time to take our baklava out of the oven. Smells divine. It's beautiful and golden. And see how all those layers have just crisped up. The butter has blown them apart, and it's just going to be fantastic. So while this is still piping hot from the oven, we're going to take our hot honey and pour over the top. Just spoonful by spoonful. You want to make sure you get every little bit of surface area with a little bit of that honey. And this honey is going to seep into all those little nooks and crannies. And it's going to give everything a beautiful, sweet taste. And this is another reason for putting those score marks in, because it allows a place for the honey to travel within those layers. And it will mix and mingle with the butter and the walnuts and the cinnamon, and it's just going to be so delicious. And that may seem like a lot of honey, but this is a lot of baklava, and it will all soak in. Don't you worry. And right now it seems like the honey is sort of pooling, but that's all going to be absorbed by the baklava. So now, the hardest part is waiting for this to cool, and we'll cut it into the diamonds along those score marks, and we'll give it a taste. Hi there, it's the next day, and our baklava has cooled overnight, and it's absorbed all that beautiful honey, and we're ready to cut it into diamonds. So we've scored the tops before baking, and then when it was hot right out of the oven, we poured the hot honey on top, and now those score marks are going to be our guide. And I'd like to start in the middle with a very sharp knife and some firm pressure. And just get a few of them cut in the center. You can also lift this whole thing out with a couple of spatulas and put it on a cutting board. You can hear how crisp it is. Look how beautiful that is. The layers are nice and crisp, and the walnuts have soaked up all that sugar and butter and honey. And the phyllo pastry is nice and crisp. Every single layer is going to be nice and crisp. I think I have to taste this one. So nice. I hope you could hear that crispy crunch as I bit into that. And that's what's so nice about this baklava recipe. If you've made baklava before, I know that there are many different methods, and some people will mix the honey with some water and orange juice and reduce it down. This method of just pouring the hot honey over the hot baklava ensures that everything stays crispy and delicious. I've never had this go soggy on me. Every single time I make it, it turns out perfectly. I hope you'll give it a try. This tastes like the holidays to me. Merry Christmas.